Turn your Bibles to Jeremiah 24th chapter. Jeremiah chapter 24. Let me tell you a story before I get to Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah. The story of a man and his wife, Matt, and let me make sure of her name. Macy, that's right. Macy. Matt and Macy. You may not remember the date, March the 3rd, 2020. You may not remember what happened. But on March 3rd, 2020, tornado, the F4 tornado went through Cookeville. It hit the house of Matt and Macy. And Matt and Macy, I had known Matt for quite a while. Matt was originally, when he got out of school, he was the youth minister at the Rivergate congregation. Then he went to the Jefferson Avenue congregation in Cookeville, and he had just in January before in 2020, he had started with the college side congregation there as their youth minister. But I had known Matt for quite a while. Anyway, on March 3rd, 2020, when the tornado went through and it hit Matt and Mason's house, unfortunately, they had a little girl, age 4, by the name of Hattie. Hattie was killed. Lane was spared. They now have another little baby, smaller baby. She is probably a year and a half or so old and has bright red hair by the name of Lane. Now, you might say, okay, you've known Matt. Yes, I've known Matt, but I got to spend time Saturday with Matt. Matt is kin to my niece's husband. And so there's a family connection. And we were together for a family birthday party for my niece's 1-year-old baby. Anyway, I asked Matt a question. The question was, how's your foundation? One of the things that they found out, one of the things that Matt found out when Hattie died, was that families need help. And Matt had started trying to help families that were losing children, babies especially. And Matt and his wife Macy started the foundation last year. And Matt, sometime last year, towards the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken, Matt resigned from being the youth minister at the college side in order to head up this nonprofit foundation. Their purpose is to help families that have lost a baby. The foundation helps pay for funerals for families that can't pay for their baby's funeral. They'll also, the foundation will also help families connect to a counselor. If these families have just lost a baby, they will help connect the family to a counselor. And the third thing that the foundation will start doing here soon is they will remember birthdays and holidays, and they will send some little something to the family to kind of help them along through the grief process. And so I asked Matt, I said, well, who are you working with? And he's working with basically Vanderbilt and East Tennessee Children's Hospital, which is in Knoxville, 2 hospitals. And I said, how many families are you helping with funerals? And he said, on the average right now, we're helping 2 families a week. Now, I want you to think about that. 2 families a week, either from Nashville or Knoxville. And he said there's far more from Nashville than there is from Knoxville that they're helping with their funeral because the families, for whatever reason, can't afford it. And you look at that, and like I say, it's sad. When I kept thinking about it, so I was talking to him, I kept thinking about Hattie. I kept thinking about the fact that, here we are as a family. It was a lot of his family, and it was, of course, my family, my sister, and all of us, and we were together. And I thought, how wonderful it would be for that little girl to have been with us. But out of tragedy, it's going to be a good thing, a good work. I hate that Matt is no longer a youth minister, but I think he's doing a fantastic thing. And you think about, out of bad comes good. Is that a possibility? And in Jeremiah 23, we find out that it is. In Jeremiah chapter 22, God had been speaking a lot and talking a lot about those that were preaching in his name and calling what their preaching was a word from the Lord, and it's not, and they need to be handled. But then things flip a little bit in Jeremiah 23. And in Jeremiah 23, what you have is God speaking to Jeremiah. And God asks Jeremiah, he says, what do you see? And Jeremiah says, well, I see figs. Well, let's look at them. What do you see? He says, well, I see bad figs and I see good figs. The bad figs are really, really bad, and the good figs are really, really good. Well, tell us the difference. Well, the bad figs were those that were left behind. When Babylon came in and took over and took children of Israel and took them back to Babylon, there were those that were left in Jerusalem and in that area. And God says those that were left, instead of depending on me, went out to find Egypt to help them and made a covenant, a treaty with Egypt, and Egypt was to protect them, and Egypt didn't do it. And God said, in essence, instead of coming to me, they went to Egypt, and he says they're bad. Nothing good is going to happen to them with it. But then there's the good figs. Well, what are the good figs? Well, the good figs, and they were really, really good. Those good figs were the children of Israel that were carried away in Babylonian captivity. And I want you to see something. In Jeremiah 24, look beginning in verse 5. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge those who are carried away captive from Judah, whom I have sent out of this place for their own good into the land of the Chaldeans. For I will set my eyes on them for good. I will bring them back to this land. I will build them and not pull them down. I will plant them and not pluck them up. I'll give them a heart to know me, that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they will return to me with their whole heart. In other words, he says, they're going away to Babylonian captivity, but when they come back, I'm going to take care of them. Out of that comes good. Out of the misfortune of Matt's family. Matter of fact, this congregation spent something like $17,000 to college side to help people in Matt's family was one of those that was saved. Out of the tragedy of Hagar comes good. Out of bad, God shines everything up and makes good. We don't always understand it, we don't always grasp it, and we don't always see how, but it does. This evening, you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, acknowledging His goodness in your life. Jesus gave us Samson.
Almost persuaded now to believe, almost persuaded Christ to receive. Seems now some soul to say, go, Spirit, go thy way, some more convenient day on the almost persuaded, come today, almost persuaded, turn not away. Jesus invites you here, angels are lingering near, prayer cry from hearts so dear, oh, want you come, almost persuaded, harvest is past, almost persuaded, doom comes at last, almost cannot avail, almost is but to fail, sad, and bitter wail, almost but lost.
All righty. Last time. You noticed it worked real well Sunday when Paul remembered to push the button. It worked real well. I'll tell you about that. Somebody sat down Sunday and forgot about that they were supposed to do that. Jim looks down, and I'm not looking at him. Suzanne said, "You're supposed to run the computer." Oh, me. She is caught in traffic. She went to see Graceland. She hadn't seen Graceland since Christmas, and she is caught in traffic at the river. And so hopes to be here, but she'll be very late if she gets here at all now. And she may be listening. If she is, darling, hurry up and get home. Psalm 12. Psalm 12. We'll see how far we get. Probably at least 12 and 13, maybe even 14, but at least 12 and 13 for tonight. This is a prayer. Well, it's not really a prayer. It's a lament in many ways. But he does offer a prayer, I think, beginning in verse 1 of the 12th chapter. The dishonest folks, the unrighteous folks, sometimes seem not only to have the majority, but also seem to have the upper hand. And it seems as if sometimes that he's oblivious to it. He's not doing anything about it. That the answer, though, is found in this psalm, that God is there, that God will care for the mistreated. He'll care for those that are hurting. He'll care for those that are poor. He'll care for those that are going through difficult times. You've heard the expression, matter of fact, fill this out for me. It takes all what to make the world go round? It takes all kinds. I don't agree with that philosophy. I really don't. He's wondering how you knew that. You married a smart woman. That's how you knew. But that is a philosophy, and that's a philosophy of life, and that's a philosophy that actually has been around for a long time. I looked up the history of it. But it's not a philosophy that I necessarily think is true. I'm sort of like, I had an elder once that made a statement. He says, they say it takes all kinds. He says, it really doesn't. He says, we just have to learn to put up with it. And I thought about that today as I was preparing this, and I never really looked at this psalm that way. But in many ways, that's the way the psalm reads. Now, not all, and not every aspect, but we think about that, and in many ways, that little proverb is not, I don't think, is accurate. Maybe you do. It doesn't necessarily take all kinds, but we have them, and we have to learn to live with them. And I think that's probably some good advice that Thomas Taylor at least gave me. But what does the psalmist say? Well, notice that it says the superscription is that it's to the chief musician. It's on an 8-stringed harp, a psalm of David. Now, yours may say something different than an 8-string harp. It may say the word shemitheth, which is a Hebrew word, and there's some discussion over whether it's harp or it's in a particular octave that was supposed to be sung. There's several other possibilities. Hebrew, like we said last week, is not near as precise as Greek in the New Testament, and sometimes it gets very vague. It's kind of interesting because I looked it up. I really didn't know. I know of a young girl that plays the harp, or did when she was younger, and I wondered how many strings they had. Well, 47 was kind of the average. There's some that are a little bit bigger than that, but a lot of strings. That may have been that they had such a thing as 8-string harps in David's day. And so it's not that important, but it's just kind of interesting to think about. It's a psalm that begins, first of all, with the psalmist offering a prayer. Notice the plea, help. Help. The idea, of course, deliver, save. But it's interesting because in the tense that's used, it's not an asking, it's a demand. It's a command. Help. Help, Lord, for the godly man
ceases. The godly man is almost extinct. Now, the New Testament covers that, doesn't it? The New Testament really covers the fact that there are going to be more ungodly than godly. There's going to be, remember, broad and wide is the way it leads to destruction, while narrow and straight is the gate that leads to life. And few there be that find it. So the New Testament hits that. But in reality, in life, there are times in which we just do wonder, how many more? Kind of reminds us of old Elijah. I'm the only one, he said. Well, what's happened to the godly man? For the faithful disappear from among the sons of men. It's hard to find a just man. Several passages in the Old Testament, Micah chapter 7, verse 2 is one that reminds us of this. But then he says, they speak idly, everyone with his neighbor. Your version, if you have a different, I'm reading out of the New King James, as you know. But if you have another version, it may say something to the fact of a falsehood or empty or vain. They speak empty or vain or false or idle words to their neighbor. See, here's his proof. His problem is, verse 1, the righteous are getting smaller. And his proof is that you got to know that the folks that are unrighteous, they're speaking empty words to their neighbor. Now, think about this, because he kind of defines those idle words, but you could take it in many different ways. You could take it from the standpoint of their preaching, their teaching, or you could talk about their everyday conversations. He sort of, I think, answers exactly what the idle words are, because he says in the last part of verse 2, the second line or second, he writes, with flattering lips and a double heart they speak. This reminds you of anybody? You know what it reminds me of? As I was thinking about this as I was working on this morning. It reminds me of Eddie Haskell on Leave It to Beaver. You remember that old show? You remember old Eddie? How he shined up to the parents, make them think he was a great guy. Well, that's sort of the way I see these folks that the psalmist talks about, these unrighteous. He says, with flattering words, they appear, they're hypocrites. They say nice things to get their way, and they have a double heart. They don't exactly mean what they say. May the Lord cut off all flattering lips. That in and of itself sounds a little rougher than probably what the psalmist really meant. The word cut off there can also mean destroy. It can mean bring to an end, destroy all flattering lips. In other words, let's end this, Lord. It would appear as we continue to read this that one of the things that the psalmist maybe in his heart is saying is, God, you can do away with these unrighteous. While it takes all kinds, we don't have to have them, and let's don't have them. You take care of them. You can straighten them out. You get them right. And so he says, and the tongue that speaks proud things or great things, let's get rid of it. Let's stop all that. Who have said, with our tongue we will prevail. They're very confident people. With our lips, our lips are our own. Who's the Lord over us? In other words, we're going to say what we're going to say. We're going to say what we want to say. We have no judge. We have no one to stop us. We're not answerable to anybody. We're big boys now. We can say what we want. That's what the psalmist is talking about, these folks, these unrighteous folks. He says, my problem is, God, they're getting more. I want to show you the proof. Here's the proof. Proof is the way they speak. Surely you can do something about them. And so then verse 5, it would seem as if he's proposing a promise, the psalmist that is, God's answer almost to this psalm. He says, for the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now I will arise, says the Lord. God says, I'm going to protect them. And that is the expected response, isn't it? That we would expect from God. I'm going to take care of them. Everything's going to be all right. I'm going to take care of the folks that are righteous. Now, he says, I will arise and I will set him in the safety for which he yearns. Well, these poor, the needy, the righteous. He says, I'm going to take care of them. Notice the words that he used. He says, I'll arise, verse 5, and I will set him in the safety of which he yearns. I'll set him, I will make sure that he is safe, in the safety in which he yearns, which he longs for. Do you remember the passage in Psalm 42 where it says, as the deer pants for the water brook, so pants my soul for you? That word pants there is the same Hebrew word there as right here where he talks about yearns. He longs for. He says, I'm going to set him in safety. That he longs for safety. He longs for peace. He longs to feel like he's not threatened. And I'm going to set him there. The words of the Lord are pure words, like silver tried in a furnace of earth. They're pure words, pure from the standpoint of both the word itself and then the similarities that he brings out when he talks about it's like silver are the same. It's the idea of putting, say, a crucible of silver, putting it to the fire to melt out all the impurities, to burn out, to cook out, if you will, all the impurities that are there. He says, notice what he says. He says, the words of the Lord are pure words. They're true. They're right. They've been tested. They've been put to the test. They've been put to the fire. There's no impurities in them. When you go to buy silver, you go to buy gold now, you want pure. You know, they'll talk about 99.9999% fine or pure when you go to buy gold or silver. Well, that's the way God's word is. It's 100%. It's been tested. It's been put to the fire, but all the impurities are out. And then he talks about like silver. And I didn't realize this till in studying some folks today. I hadn't thought about it, I guess maybe is the best way. The preference in biblical times of silver as compared to gold. You know, we like gold a lot better than we like silver. You can trade silver. You can afford silver a little bit better than you can gold. Not much, but it's all high now. But in biblical times, they really preferred silver. And that was their metal of choice. That was their metal of value. And so he uses, as the folks that I was reading and talking, they were talking about this, the psalmist is using for the folks of his day what they considered the finest, the best. And like silver tried in a furnace of earth, tested, purified, perfected, purified 7 times, clean. He keeps his word. You shall keep them, O Lord. You shall preserve them from this generation forever. So the psalmist says, look, he says, I know about you, God. I may not understand everything's going on, may not get it, may not see how it's all going to work out. I feel like the unrighteous are taking advantage of the poor and the needy and the righteous. And God, I know you're going to protect them. I know you're going to watch over them. And so then he kind of gives what some call a settlement. The wicked prowl on every side, when vileness is exalted among the sons of men. We'll have them always with us. He says the wicked prowl. The word prowl can also mean strut. The wicked strut. And they strut on every side. There's still an arrogance about them when vileness is exalted among the sons of men. We'll always have them. There's not a lot we can do about them, and we'll just learn to deal with them. It's kind of the settlement that the psalmist says that he's making here in verse 8. He does feel like, it's worthy of note, he does feel like that even though these unrighteous folks have put on good. He still feels like God's there. God's going to watch over them. God's going to protect them. God's going to need. But we still have to live with them. Anything else or something we missed? Yeah. No, that's not. Yeah. Yeah. Human nature does not change through the years. It's packaged different, but it doesn't change. Uh, I was reading something today that talked about why people don't go to church, and it talked about the fact, or younger adults don't go to church, and it was talking about the fact that at least one of the factors that they said was this idea of you can get online now and you can find any church you want, and it's just more convenient. It cuts out a lot of extra time and it's more convenient. Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's right. You're right. You're right. Well, you know, we put ours out on where you can listen on the telephone, and every preacher that I talk to wants to know how to use Teams because well, we've got people that and matter of fact, especially during COVID, we had some folks that called in and listened to because they knew me, I guess, was part of it, but also they called in because their church was doing things that either A, they were not having church at all, or B, they were having church, but they were putting it on like Facebook, and they didn't have Facebook and they did not want a Facebook account, whatever for whatever reason. And but one of the things that has seemingly happened with COVID is this idea of every church now has some means just about of getting the word outside their buildings. That's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, but it's also a bad thing. It's a good thing in that we can reach others, and it's a good way really to tell people. A lot of people, sadly, have they will tell you they're not prejudiced. Okay, let's just start there. This is going weird. You say that's a weird place to start, but they'll tell you I'm not prejudiced. And then you say, well, would you like to come to church with me? Why, sure. Where do you go? Church of Christ? No, you people. Heard it? You heard it? I have. You people. Thought you wasn't prejudiced. Oh, well, okay. But getting, like we do with Teams and then putting it on the website, the recordings, it gives people a chance to hear what we are about. And I encourage you to just tell your friends and all, give them the numbers, call it in and listen. See, just see what we're about. Go to the website, listen to some of the recordings. If they still got doubts, they can go to YouTube and they can put my name in, and they're old, but they'll see videos of a lot of old sermons of mine that we did when I was in Dixon. And so you do those things, but unfortunately, sometimes those things kind of people take them the wrong way. And unfortunately, since COVID, many folks have decided that the convenience of staying at home in your pajamas, drinking a cup of coffee, is better than the communal. See, you thought I'd forgotten you. I was trying to get back to it. Just took a long time to wind up to throw the pitch. The communal aspect of church. But when you think about Hebrews 10:25, man, we have pounded that verse for years, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as manner of some is, but exhorting one another. What's the context? The context, verse 23, is basically we're to encourage one another. We're to build up each other. And that's part of being part of the church, isn't it? After all, the whole body is fitly joined together and compacted, to which every joint supplies, according to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14 through 16. Well, how do we do that? How do we encourage, knowing that we're tied together? Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. So we come to church for the communal aspect of building one another up because we want to get to heaven. But there's a lot of folks missing out on that. And so consequently, they're missing out, even though, as Jay said in that article, one of the things to think about, and I did not read this article that Jay read, or I haven't read it. One of the things that, if you stop and think about it, our society is still family oriented. You might say, oh, there's a lot of dysfunctional families out there. Think about it. Why do people go to bars? There's a family there. There are drop-ins, but there's a lot of regulars there. That's their family. We want them to replace that family with church family, this family. And that should be the aspect I think the church should take now in the way society believes. But the promise is going to take care of it. Anything else? Good point. Well, let's learn some lessons right quick that we can learn from the 12th Psalm. I think, first of all, especially as we see the psalmist opening up, and that is that God will hear and answer all of our prayers. But when we think about God hearing and answering all of our prayers, we have to remember that God's not going to reconstruct the world so that all evil is eliminated. He will sustain the Christian, the righteous. He'll protect those who trust in him, even in a wicked world. But he's not going to reconstruct the world. I think that's a point to find in verses 1 and 2. We have the wicked, but as verse 8 says, basically we're going to have to learn to live with them. Another lesson we might learn is that we should keep living righteously even when others aren't. And then another lesson is that God does not run out on us. Evil may happen in the world, but that doesn't mean that God approves of it. Now there's a thought our world has not dealt with, and that is, just because it exists does not mean that God has put his stamp of approval on it. Profanity exists. Matter of fact, as we get into especially the 14th chapter, that exists. That does not mean God puts his stamp of approval on it. There are folks that are atheists. That does not mean God puts his stamp of approval on it. And then there are practical atheists. That you might say they believe God. Well, then they're not atheists. Well, from a strict definition of the word, you're right, but they don't follow his word. They believe that he exists, but they don't believe that his Bible is something that's to be followed and to be bound by them. And so they're almost what a lot of folks call practical atheists. And they're there. That doesn't mean God approves of it. Just because it's there doesn't mean God approves of it. There are practices in this world today. That doesn't mean God approves of them. Does he allow them to happen? Yes. Why? Because he allows man to have to be a free moral agent, freedom of will, freedom of choice. And that freedom of choice can get us into trouble. It can also get us out of trouble, but it can get us into trouble when we begin to use it in ways that are contrary to what God has revealed in His will. And so we learn from that. Anything else? All right, well, let's look at the 13th Psalm. This is a lament as well. I've used that word a few times, and I think you know what it means, but I got to think about it today, and I thought, maybe we should define a lament a little bit better. A lament is a cry out for God for help. Lamenting the situation as it is, or whether it be as a group or as an individual, wanting better, wanting God, reaching out. Who was it? Was it Alexander McLaren said that it's reaching out for God when you know that that's the only one you can reach out to. And that's a pretty good way of defining a lament. But this is a lament. This is seemingly God is silent again. Where are you, O God? The time of this writing is unknown. We do know that the superscription is to the chief musician, a Psalm of David. We believe that it's a Psalm of David. And if it is a Psalm of David, not knowing when it occurred, it doesn't really help us as far as helping us better grasp the verses themselves. Now, I think they're very self-explanatory and we can grasp them. But I do like what Brother Eddie McClure said Clore said in his commentary. Eddie said that we should think about the possibility of them having occurred, this psalm being written while David is fleeing from Saul. Remember, there's 15 years in there where David is fleeing from Saul. Shouldn't have to be, but he is fleeing for his very life. And if that was the case, then it kind of makes these verses a little bit more lively. But we don't really know. But the question is, how long? Look at how he begins. How long? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Now, God doesn't forget anyone. But it's interesting that the question that he asks is, how long will you forget me forever? The idea of forever is not everlasting, but it's just continually. Just day after day. I'm not seemingly getting anything. How long will you forget me? How long will you hide your face from me? See, it's kind of interesting. In the first line, he says, God, you've forgotten me. In the second line, he accuses God of intentionally turning his face from him. And then he says, how long shall I take counsel in my soul? So he's turned inward, and he's talking to himself. Having sorrow in my heart daily, how long will my enemy be exalted over me? His suffering, his problems, his own heart, his relationship with God, his relationship with others is hurting him. And he asks these questions. You ever ask the question, how long? How long am I going to have to go through this? How long am I going to have to suffer? How long, God, is this going to take? Where are you, God? And so that's how the psalmist begins. It's kind of bold, I think. Now we see this in a lot of other psalms, don't get me wrong. But it's just the boldness of the psalmists. And remember, some of those, the psalms that are really where they question God, we don't know who wrote them. A lot of the psalms are we don't have a clue who wrote them. By inspiration, of course, we know it from God, but I mean from the standpoint of individual. And so to question God, it would appear as if that's not something that's wrong, but understanding that in our questioning of God, we come back to God. See, a lot of folks, when they begin to question God, they just keep going. The psalmists seem to be asking questions of God with the idea of understanding that they're going to see God in the end of it. And God is the answer, even though they have the questions. And so he asks the questions, God, why have you forgotten me? How long have you forgotten me? Which is an accusation that's just, it's really bold. How you turned your face from me? I've had to turn to myself. I've had to talk to myself. And then he says, consider me. Look at verse 3. Consider and hear me, O Lord, my God. Give special attention to me. In times of our hurting, in times of our heartache and distress, there are times in which we do the very same. Can you listen to me, God? Can you hear what I'm saying? Give special attention to me. But notice, think about it. He has not forsaken God or forgotten God in the midst of his trouble, because look how he refers to him, my God. Not God, not the God, not some God, not a God, not everybody else's God, my God. So he hasn't wandered from God. He's questioning, yes, but he hasn't wandered from God. Enlighten my eyes. The phrase there is almost the idea of give me a revival of strength, revive my strength. You can look in folks' eyes and you can tell whether they feel good or not, right? You may not can tell what's wrong with them, but you can say, you don't feel good, do you? Well, how can you tell? Well, your eyes look a little fuzzy, look a little bad. And so he says, enlighten my eyes, give me some strength, lest I sleep the sleep of death. It would appear that maybe he's near death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. He seems to imply almost that his death would be something not only that his enemy would rejoice in, but would reflect on God. In other words, God, you can't let my enemy have the upper hand, because when they do, they're going to gloat. And when they gloat, they're going to say, look at me, as opposed to look at them and they're gone. It's kind of an interesting argument. I found that intriguing, and when reading the folks I read and reading someone, they made that statement, and I thought, that's an intriguing thought. Now, if you put this within the context of the time of David wandering around, fleeing from King Saul, when you put him in that context, and you think about, well, yeah, it could be, he could wonder, where's God? Why haven't you done something? Where are you? Why haven't you helped me? And then he looks out there and he sees old Saul. Maybe think about it. If you want to get a little far-fetched, think about it like after the cave at En-Gedi, where David saved Saul's life, and he stepped back, so to speak, not to kill the king, even though his friend said, "Hey, you can kill him now," and he didn't. He saved him. And Saul basically, when David confronted him with it from a distance, Saul basically said, well, you're a better man than I am, right? Well, put that within the context of now David, after that happens, David's wondering, what am I going to do to this man? Why didn't God put a stop to him? And so David turns it on God and says, God, just consider me. But I want you to think about, my enemy's going to say, I prevailed against him. And he says, what good is that going to do me, and what good is that going to do you and your cause? But he says, but, there's the contrast, but, I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I'll sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. The salvation there is not because of context. It's not talking about salvation from the standpoint of the saving of soul. But when he talks about my heart shall rejoice in your salvation, he's talking about the Lord ending his misery and his opposition, saving him from the difficulties that he's going through, delivering. The word save can also have the connotation of delivering. And so he says, at the end, when I've been delivered, he says, my heart will rejoice. But he says, I haven't forsaken you. I still trust in you. still trust in your mercy. And then he gives this song of rejoicing. I'll sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. He said, I'll sing to the Lord for what he's done for me. Beautiful psalm, I think. I mean, it just, for me, it's so practical. It just hits home. Yeah, there are times like that. Anything else? Well, a couple of lessons we might learn is have faith, keep the faith in difficult times. And when you think you really have nowhere to turn, you have the very best place to turn. You have God. This is really, I think, a good psalm if you've got some young people, some teenagers or young adults that are having difficulty, feeling like life's against them. We call it mental health now. And it's just a reminder of you're going to question and you're going to have those difficult times, but just trust in God. Just have faith in God. All men, no matter who, and I'm using men from a generic standpoint, all men have faith. It's just in what or who that they have faith. And unfortunately, most people, when they have struggles and they begin to look outside God, turn inwardly, have faith in themselves. So they begin to trust themselves. I'll get myself out of this. I'll get myself through this. I'll work my way out of it. And they don't include God in the process. And that creates the problems. Anything else? Well, the 14th Psalm, we won't get to that. The 14th Psalm and the 53rd Psalm are pretty much the same. It's led some folks to believe that the 53rd Psalm was changed just a little bit. There are a few little changes in the Hebrew. It's led some to believe that the 53rd Psalm was actually copy, and the changes that were made, the very, very few changes that were made, 53rd Psalm, that they were made because the 53rd Psalm was used in a worship setting. And so while it reads very much the same, it reads just a little bit differently, at least in the Hebrew and in some English versions, depending upon the version you have. We don't know if that's the answer. We really don't know why. But we see the difference, and we understand that God wanted us to have both of them. And that's all we have to understand. But the 14th Psalm is a great psalm because it talks about the fool, and it talks about atheism, if you will, and the fact that folks believe that, where's God? And why hasn't God helped us? And so we'll look at that. We'll look at why folks say there is no God. We'll kind of explore that a little bit next week. Anything else we need to talk about? We do want to remember, I talked to Ken this afternoon. We do want to remember Deborah and Donna, especially, with passing Randy. Jackie, also his wife, cuts my hair, so Jackie as well. And it's very sudden. We do want to remember them and others. Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day and for the blessing of it, for the beautiful sunshine, for the spring weather that we're beginning to experience, for the rain that so replenishes the earth and gives green to all the plants that you have provided for us. We're thankful for this season. We're thankful for what it brings and for what it means and what it shows. We have a lot of folks that are out this evening that are still traveling. We have those that will be traveling this weekend, and we ask that you watch over them and bless them and keep them. We also ask that you be with the Sexton family, that you bless them. We know this is a shock, And we know that it's not only the sadness of the event itself, but the shock that so hurts. And we ask that you give them comfort and strength, and that you give us the words that we need to help this family go through this difficult time. We ask that you watch over us, that you bless us and keep us, and that you hold us within the hollow of your hand for the Christ's name. Have a great week, rest of the week. Hope to see you Sunday. If not, we'll see you when we see you. But